Let her go right now. The voice thundered to the marble lobby like a clap of lightning. Everyone turned, eyes wide, as a tall man in the dark suit stormed forward. His silver hair gleamed under the chandelier lights, and his hand was raised, pointing directly at the guards who had pinned a young black girl against the wall. "She's not a thief," he roared, his voice shaking the hall. "She's my daughter." Gasps swept across the room. The crowd froze. The girl's eyes darted in confusion, her lips trembling. The security guards exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do. A billionaire, one of the most powerful men in the city, was standing in front of them, defending a girl who looked nothing like him, a girl who wore shoes too small for her feet and a faded backpack clutched to her chest. The lobby fell silent. Even the fountain in the center seemed to pause its bubbling, as though waiting for what would happen next. And then, it hadn't started in the mansion lobby, not at all. The story began far away, on the other side of the city, in a quiet neighborhood where houses leaned tiredly on each other, their paint peeling under the weight of time. If this story touched you, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice matters here. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you never miss more powerful stories like this one. On the porch of one of those houses sat a woman with silver gray hair tucked neatly under a scarf. Her hands were rough with age, her back bent, but her eyes were still sharp, eyes that had seen both hardship and hope. Her name was Evelyn Carter, though most folks in the neighborhood simply called her Grandma Evelyn. Every morning, Evelyn watched the street from her porch, greeting children walking to school and neighbors heading to work. She lived alone now. Her own children had long since moved away, scattered by the struggles of life. But she wasn't lonely, at least not completely. The children of the neighborhood often came by, and she always had a cookie or a kind word to spare. That morning, however, her gaze lingered on a young girl shuffling slowly down the street. Her backpack was torn at the seams, and her sneakers flapped with every step. Evelyn knew the girl. Her name was Danielle, though most of the kids just called her Danny. She was no more than 12 years old. "Morning, baby," Evelyn called out gently. Danielle lifted her head. She managed a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Morning, Grandma Evelyn." The old woman's heart pinched. She could see the weariness in the girl's face, the kind of tired that didn't belong to someone so young. "Why are you walking so slow today?" Evelyn asked. Danielle hesitated, then sighed. "Just tired, I guess." But Evelyn knew better. She had seen that look before, the same look her own children wore, when the cupboards at home were bare, when the weight of the world pressed too heavy on little shoulders. "Come sit for a while," Evelyn said, patting the chair beside her. Danielle obeyed, her backpack sliding to the ground with a soft thud. Evelyn leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Tell me the truth now. What's wrong?" The girl stared at her hands. After a long pause, she whispered, "We don't have much food left at home." Evelyn's heart ached. She had known things were tough for Danielle's family. Her mother working double shift at the diner, her father gone from the picture, but hearing the words out loud was like a knife. "You wait here," Evelyn said firmly. She rose, slowly but with purpose, and shuffled inside. A few minutes later, she returned with a small brown paper bag. Inside were apples, bread, and a jar of peanut butter. It wasn't much, but it was something. Danielle's eyes widened. "Grandma Evelyn, I can't take this." "Yes, you can," Evelyn interrupted. "And you will. Now go on. Take it home and make yourself a sandwich. No child should go hungry, not while I'm around." Tears filled Danielle's eyes. She hugged the bag to her chest. "Thank you." Evelyn patted her cheek softly. "You remember this, baby. Kindness matters. Someday when you're able, you pass it on." Danielle nodded, though in her young mind, she wondered if she would ever have a chance. That night, however, as Evelyn sat by her small window and looked at the city lights far in the distance, she had no idea how far her kindness would reach or how much it would cost. The following week brought change. Danielle had taken Evelyn's words to heart. But hunger doesn't vanish overnight, and her family struggles grew heavier. One Friday evening, she found herself outside a towering mansion in the richest part of the city. The gates gleamed with gold accents, and a fountain taller than any house she'd ever seen sparkled under the moonlight. She hadn't planned to be there. Not really. She had just wandered after school, following her feet until she stood in front of the state she had only heard rumors about. The home of Benjamin Whitaker, the billionaire. People said he owned half the city. They said his heart was made of stone. Danielle clutched her empty backpack, her stomach aching. She didn't want to steal. She didn't even dare step too close to the gate. But when she saw the boxes of leftover catering supplies being wheeled toward the side entrance, the smell of warm bread drifted toward her, her eyes stung with tears. Bread. That was all she wanted. Just one slice. But before she could make a move, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Hey, what are you doing here?" Two security guards strode toward her, their hands already reaching. Danielle froze, and in moments, everything spiraled. The guards grabbed her arms, accusing her of trying to break in. She pleaded, insisting she hadn't touched anything, but her words fell on deaf ears. They dragged her into the marble lobby, where chandeliers glittered above and wealthy guests turned to stare. And then, "Let her go right now." The booming voice struck again. Everyone turned to see Benjamin Whitaker himself, striding forward, fury burning in his eyes. "She's not a thief," he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. "She's my daughter." The crowd gasped again. The guards froze. And Danielle, her heart pounding, could only stare in shock. But what happened after that moment would shake everyone in the room. The room froze. Everyone's eyes stayed fixed on Benjamin Whitaker, the billionaire whose word could make or break fortunes. He stood tall, his voice echoing again, firmer than before. "She's not a thief. She's my daughter." The two security guards loosened their grip on Danielle, but confusion twisted across their faces. They had been doing their job. Why was their boss, the richest man in the city, defending this ragged girl with the torn backpack and patched-up shoes? Danielle blinked, trembling. She didn't know what to say. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She wasn't his daughter. She had never even met him before. The guests who had gathered in the lobby murmured among themselves. Some gasped in disbelief. Others whispered in tones of gossip. "Did you hear that? He called her his daughter. How's that possible? She doesn't look like him. What's going on here?" Benjamin turned his gaze back to the guards. "I said let her go." His voice brooked no argument. Hesitant, the men released their grip. Danielle stumbled forward, clutching her backpack tight against her chest like a shield. Benjamin moved quickly, placing his hand protectively on her shoulder. His palm was firm, steady, almost fatherly. "No one lays a hand on her again. Do you understand me?" The guards nodded, embarrassed, their eyes lowered. But inside Danielle's mind, a storm raged. Why is he saying that? Why is he calling me his daughter? Benjamin turned to the crowd, his eyes sharp. "This matter is closed. Everyone, return to your evening." The wealthy guests, though curious, obeyed. The murmurs faded as people drifted back to their champagne glasses and hors d'oeuvres, though many kept stealing glances at Danielle. The fountain resumed its bubbling. The music from the string quartet resumed, and the mansion once again looked like a place of elegance, though the air remained charged with mystery. Benjamin lowered his voice and bent toward Danielle. "Come with me," he whispered. Danielle hesitated. Every instinct told her to run. But where would she go? She had nowhere safe to hide, and this man, for reasons she couldn't understand, had just stopped her from being dragged away. She nodded shakily. Benjamin guided her toward a side hallway, away from the main crowd. His stride was long, confident, while hers was quick and nervous, her little sneakers squeaking softly on the polished floor. As they walked, Danielle couldn't stop glancing up at him. She had never been this close to someone like him before. His suit was perfectly tailored. His shoes shined like mirrors. Even his cologne smelled like wealth. Finally, they stepped into a quieter lounge room, lined with bookshelves and leather chairs. The door shut softly behind them, muffling the sounds of the party. Benjamin turned, studying her. His eyes were softer now, though his jaw remained set. "Are you all right?" Danielle swallowed hard. Why did you say that? Her voice cracked. I'm not your daughter. Benjamin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly to the window, looking out over the city lights. For a moment, silence filled the room. Finally, he spoke, because they wouldn't have believed you otherwise. They needed a reason to let you go. Danielle blinked. His words sank in slowly. So, he didn't really think she was his daughter? Or did he? Benjamin turned back to her, his eyes steady. Tell me, child, what brought you here tonight? Her throat tightened. She wanted to lie, to say it was a mistake, but the weight of the evening pressed too heavy. Her stomach growled softly, betraying her. She lowered her eyes. I was just hungry. Benjamin's expression softened. He walked toward her, his shoes clicking on the wooden floor. Hungry? Danielle nodded, shame flooding her cheeks. I didn't want to steal. I swear. I just smelled the bread, and I thought maybe I could ask. Her eyes filled with tears. But then they grabbed me. Benjamin studied her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he knelt slightly, lowering himself closer to her level. You're a brave girl, speaking the truth. No one had ever called her brave before. Danielle wiped at her eyes with the back of her sleeve. Benjamin straightened again. What's your name? Danielle, she whispered. But everyone calls me Danny. Danny, Benjamin repeated, as if testing the sound. He gave a small nod. Well, Danny, you don't have to be afraid anymore. But Danielle wasn't sure she could believe that. Back in her neighborhood, Grandma Evelyn sat in her worn-out armchair, knitting quietly. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. She thought of Danny, worried about her. She hadn't seen the girl since that morning. Something in her heart told her the child was in trouble. She whispered a prayer under her breath, asking for protection over the young girl she had grown to love like her own granddaughter. Meanwhile, Benjamin had asked his driver to bring food. Minutes later, a tray of warm bread, fruit, and a glass of milk was set in front of Danielle. She stared at it, her stomach twisting in both hunger and hesitation. Go ahead, Benjamin urged gently. Slowly, she reached for the bread. She took a bite, and instantly tears filled her eyes again. It was soft, warm, everything her empty stomach had been begging for. She ate quickly, then slowed, embarrassed by how desperate she looked. Benjamin said nothing, only watching. There was something in his eyes that wasn't pity. It was recognition. When she was done, she sat back, wiping her mouth. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded. You're welcome. For a while, they sat in silence. Then Danielle asked quietly, Why did you really help me? Benjamin's face grew thoughtful. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Because once a long time ago, I was just like you. Danielle's eyes widened. You? But you're rich. He chuckled softly, though there was sadness in it. Not always. There was a time when I didn't know where my next meal would come from, and someone showed me kindness, just like you needed tonight. His words sank deep into her young heart. But before Danielle could say anything more, the lounge door burst open. The two security guards stood there again, looking pale and uneasy. Sir, one stammered, we have a problem. Benjamin's eyes narrowed. What problem? The guard exchanged glances with his partner. Then he said it. Someone called the police. They're on their way. They think the girl tried to break into the mansion. Danielle's heart dropped. Her hands tightened around the edge of the chair. The room seemed to spin. Benjamin's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. Who called them? The guard shook his head. We don't know. Maybe one of the guests. Benjamin rose to his feet, his presence filling the room like thunder. He looked at Danielle, then at the guards. His voice was sharp. Then we'd better be ready. Because if they think they can take this girl away, he paused, his eyes blazing. They'll have to go through me first. The air grew tense, thick with the weight of what was coming. And outside, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. The wailing sirens grew louder, echoing down the long driveway like the approach of doom. Red and blue lights flashed against the mansion's tall windows. painting streaks across the polished marble floors. Danielle's small body tense in her chair. Her knuckles were white from clutching the armrests, her breath shallow. She had never been in trouble with the law before. The very thought of police officers storming it made her chest ache with fear. Benjamin Whitaker, however, stood tall, his broad shoulders squared, his jaw set like stone. He faced the door as if he had been preparing for this very battle. The guard shifted uneasily. "Sir, what do you want us to do? They'll be at the door in seconds." Benjamin's voice was calm, yet it carried a weight that silenced everyone. "Let them in. But remember this, not a word against a girl. She is under my protection now." Danielle's eyes widened. She couldn't understand why this man, a billionaire who owed her nothing, was standing up for her like this. The front doors of the mansion swung open with a crash. Four police officers stepped inside, hands on their belts, radios crackling. Their faces were stern, their eyes scanning the glittering lobby. Behind them, the curious guests peeked from the ballroom, whispering like waves. An officer with graying hair stepped forward. His badge gleamed in the chandelier light. "We got a call about a break-in. A minor caught on the premises." Benjamin moved before anyone else could speak. "That's enough," he said firmly. His voice carried the weight of authority money could never buy. The officer looked at him, recognizing the man instantly. "Mr. Whitaker," he hesitated, then cleared his throat. "Sir, we have to follow up. Where's the child?" Benjamin extended his arm, motioning toward Danielle. She sat frozen, her wide eyes darting between the men in uniforms. The officer stepped closer, his gaze narrowing. "Miss, did you attempt to enter this property unlawfully?" Danielle opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Fear gripped her too tightly. "She's not answering." Another officer said, "We'll need to take her in for questioning." Benjamin's hand shot up. "No, she's not going anywhere." The tension in the room thickened instantly. The lead officer frowned. "Mr. Whitaker, with all due respect, we can't just ignore a report. You can when the report is false." Benjamin's voice was steel. He stepped directly between the officers and Danielle, towering over them like a wall of protection. "This girl is not a thief. She is my guest, and anyone who says otherwise will answer to me." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Few dared to oppose Benjamin Whitaker. His influence stretched through the city like roots of an old tree, deep, unshakable. But law was law, and appearances mattered. "Then why?" The officer asked carefully. "Was she found with your security holding her?" Benjamin's eyes burned. "Because they made a mistake." For a moment, the only sound was the bubbling fountain in the center of the lobby. The officers seemed torn, caught between duty and the undeniable authority of the man before them. Finally, the lead officer sighed. "We'll need a statement, sir, from both you and the girl." Benjamin nodded once. "You'll have it, but not tonight. Tonight, she stays here. She will not be dragged into the back of a patrol car like a criminal." His words rang out like a verdict. The officer hesitated, then finally relented. "Fine, but we'll be back tomorrow." With that, the police turned and left, the red and blue lights fading into the night. Danielle exhaled sharply, her body sagging with relief. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. Benjamin turned to her, his expression softening. "You're safe now, Danny." Her eyes shimmered. "Why are you doing this for me? You don't even know me." Benjamin paused. His throat tightened, but he pushed through. "Because once someone did the same for me, and I swore if I ever had the chance, I would return the kindness." Danielle stared at him, her heart pounding with both gratitude and confusion. Later that night, Benjamin led Danielle to one of the guest rooms. It was larger than her entire apartment back home, with soft white sheets and a bed that looked like a cloud. Her backpack looked out of place sitting on the polished nightstand. "This will be your room for tonight," Benjamin said gently. "Rest. We'll figure everything out in the morning." Danielle hesitated in the doorway. "You mean I can stay?" Benjamin gave a small smile. "Of course. No one's sending you back out there tonight." Her lips trembled. No one had ever given her such kindness without asking for something in return. She whispered a shaky "thank you" before stepping inside. As the door clicked shut behind her, Benjamin lingered in the hallway. His mind drifted back to a night long ago when he'd been a hungry boy, standing in the rain, saved only by the kindness of a stranger. And now, fate had given him a chance to repay that gift. Back in her neighborhood, Grandma Evelyn stirred awake from her armchair. A strange unease pressed on her heart. She rose slowly, moving to the window, peering out into the dark street. No sign of Danny. She whispered again, "Lord, keep that child safe." Hours later, Danny awoke in the mansion room. The sheets were too soft, too strange. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The guards, the billionaire's voice, the police. She sat up, clutching her backpack. Her stomach churned, not from hunger this time, but from worry. What would happen tomorrow when the police returned? What would happen when Benjamin realized she didn't belong in his world? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sound outside the window. A faint scrape. Then another. Her heart thudded. Slowly, she slid off the bed and crept toward the glass. She pulled the curtain aside and froze. A shadowy figure stood outside, near the tree that brushed against the second-floor balcony. The figure was climbing, their face hidden, their movements quick and deliberate. Danny's breath caught in her throat. Someone was breaking into the mansion, and they were heading straight toward her window. Danielle's breath hitched as she pressed herself against the wall beside the window. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain the intruder could hear it. The shadowy figure climbed steadily, gripping the balcony rail with gloved hands. She wanted to scream, to call out for Benjamin, but fear locked her throat. If she made a sound, the stranger might smash through the glass before help arrived. The latch on the balcony door rattled. Slowly, deliberately, Danny clutched her backpack like a shield, inching backward toward the bed. The door creaked. And then, step away from a window. Benjamin's voice boomed from the hallway. The door to Danny's room burst open, and within seconds he was inside, his eyes sharp, his stance protective. He held a heavy flashlight like a weapon. The figure froze on the balcony, startled by the sudden interruption. The beam of Benjamin's flashlight cut across the glass, revealing the masked face of a man dressed in black. Benjamin growled, "Who are you? What do you want?" The intruder didn't answer. Instead, he leaped back from the balcony, dropping onto the lawn below. "Stay here," Benjamin ordered Danny before rushing out of the room. Danny's legs trembled as she staggered to the window. She peeked out just in time to see Benjamin sprinting across the manicured lawn, his security guards trailing behind with flashlights waving. The masked intruder darted toward the tall hedges surrounding the estate. "Catch him!" Benjamin roared, but the stranger was fast. Too fast. By the time the guards reached the hedge, the man had vanished into the night, swallowed by the shadows beyond the estate gates. Benjamin stood at the edge of the lawn, his chest heaving, his fists clenched. Whoever that was, they hadn't come by accident. Back inside, Danny sat on the bed, knees pulled to her chest. When Benjamin returned, his face was tight with frustration. "It's all right," he said, his voice gentler as he closed the door behind him. "He's gone now." Danny's eyes were wide. "Who was that?" Benjamin shook his head. "I don't know, but I intend to find out." Her lip trembled. Was he trying to get me? Benjamin paused. He wanted to tell her no, to soothe her fears. But the truth was too uncertain. Whoever had called the police earlier clearly wanted Danny gone from his house. And now, someone had risked breaking in. "Listen to me, Danny." He knelt in front of her, his eyes steady. "No matter what happens, you're safe here. Do you understand? No one will touch you while I'm around." For the first time that night, Danny believed him. She nodded. Benjamin rose, straightening his jacket. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll deal with the police. And I'll make sure extra guards are posted outside this room tonight." Danny curled beneath the blankets, though her eyes stayed open long after Benjamin left. Her thoughts spun like a carousel. Why would someone try to break into the mansion now? Was it because of me? Her last thought before sleep finally claimed her was of Grandma Evelyn. She wished the old woman were here. The following morning, sunlight streamed to the tall windows of the guest room. Danny woke slowly, her body stiff from a restless night. For a moment, she thought the intruder had been just a bad dream, but the memory of Benjamin's flashlight cutting across the glass reminded her had been all too real. She slipped out of bed, clutching her backpack. She couldn't shake the feeling she didn't belong here. The sheets were too white, the walls too tall, the silence too heavy. When she stepped into the hallway, a maid smiled kindly at her. "Good morning, miss. Mr. Whitaker is waiting downstairs." Danny nodded shyly and followed the polished staircase down to the dining room. The table stretched so long it looked like it could seat an army. At the far end sat Benjamin, a newspaper in hand, a plate of eggs and toast before him. "Come, Danny," he said warmly, motioning for her to sit. She slid into a chair, her small hands resting on the edge of the table. A servant quickly set a plate before her, pancakes, fresh fruit, and warm syrup. Her eyes widened. "Eat," Benjamin encouraged. She hesitated, then dug in, her hunger overcoming her nervousness. Benjamin folded his newspaper. "The police will be back today. But don't worry. I'll handle it." Danny swallowed hard. "What if they don't believe you?" "They will," Benjamin said firmly. "And even if they don't, they'll learn quickly what it means to cross me." There was a strength in his voice that made Danny's shoulders relax, even if just a little. Back in the neighborhood, Grandma Evelyn had spent the morning searching. She had knocked on doors, asked neighbors, even walked to the school. No one had seen Danny since the day before. Worry pressed like a stone in her chest. She paused at the corner store, gripping her cane tightly. "Lord," she whispered, "help me find that child." That afternoon, just as Benjamin had predicted, the police returned. This time there were more of them, and their expressions were sterner. The lead officer from the night before stepped forward. "Mr. Whitaker, we need to clear this matter. We've had multiple reports claiming the girl tried to break in. If you continue to interfere, we may have to escalate." Benjamin's jaw tightened. "Escalate? Against a 12-year-old child? Shame on you." The officer didn't flinch. "Then prove she belongs here." The demand hung in the air like a blade. Benjamin slowly turned his gaze toward Danny, who stood nervously at his side. He wanted to protect her, but he also knew the officers weren't leaving without answers. He looked back at them, his voice measured. "You want proof? Then you'll have it. Tonight. But until then, this girl stays under my roof." The officers exchanged skeptical looks, but finally, the lead one relented. "Tonight, then. But if we don't see proof, we'll take her with us." Danny's heart sank. She gripped Benjamin's sleeve, panic flashing in her eyes. "Don't be afraid," Benjamin whispered to her. "I have a plan." But deep inside, even he knew the truth. He was running out of time. Night fell quickly. The mansion buzzed with tension as extra guards patrolled the grounds. Benjamin sat in his study, making phone calls, flipping through old files. Danny sat quietly by the fireplace, hugging her knees. Finally, Benjamin slammed the phone down. His eyes burned with determination. "If they want proof, I'll give them proof." He turned to Danny. "But I need you to trust me, no matter what happens." She nodded weakly. Before he could say more, a guard burst through the door, breathless. "Sir, you need to come at once. There's been an incident." Benjamin shot to his feet. "What incident?" The guard's face was pale. It's one of the guests from last night. We found him unconscious by the east gate. And next to him," he swallowed hard, "we found Danny's backpack." Danny gasped. Her hands flew to her shoulders. The backpack she carried since yesterday. It was no longer in the room. Her voice shook. But I didn't." Benjamin's face hardened. He turned to the guard. "Show me." The guard nodded, leading them toward the gates. Danny's legs wobbled as she followed, her fear growing with every step. And when they reached the scene, the sight stole her breath. A man lay sprawled on the grass, motionless, blood seeping from a wound on his head. And beside him, unmistakably, was her faded, torn backpack. The guards whispered among themselves, suspicion clouding their eyes. The police, who had been called again, were already pulling up to the gates. Benjamin's voice thundered, but for the first time, even he sounded strained. Who put that there? The officers stepped forward, their flashlights sweeping the scene. One of them pointed at Danny. There's our proof. She was involved. Danny froze in terror, her eyes filling with tears, and Benjamin realized, with dawning horror, that he was running out of ways to protect her. The shouting from the lobby echoed down the marble hallways like thunder rolling through the night. Everyone inside the billionaire's estate froze for a second. Maids clutched their aprons, security guards pressed their radios tighter to their ears, and even the caterers paused as trays of expensive food trembled in their hands. Mr. Harrington's voice, one guard muttered. That's his voice. People rarely heard Robert Harrington, the reclusive billionaire, raise his voice. His name was usually mentioned with quiet reverence in the newspapers, his wealth discussed in hushed tones in business circles. But now his roar had the tremble of a father, not a tycoon. She's not a thief. She's my daughter, he had screamed, his voice breaking on the word daughter. The crowd of onlookers could barely process what they'd heard. The young black girl the guards had wrestled to the floor, hands restrained, was being called his daughter? Nobody could believe it. The girl herself, Layla, felt frozen, her cheek pressed to the cold marble. She blinked back tears, her mind spiraling. Daughter? What is he talking about? The guards hesitated, glancing at each other in confusion. The grip on her arms loosened just slightly, enough for her to shift and catch a glimpse of Robert Harrington storming toward them, his face red, eyes wild. He didn't look like a billionaire right now. He looked like a man protecting something precious. Let her go, he bellowed, his finger stabbing the air. Right now, before I fire every last one of you. The entire lobby erupted into murmurs. Staff whispered furiously. Guests from a charity gala, dressed in glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos, leaned closer to see what was happening. Some pulled out phones, their screens glowing as they tried to record. But Robert's eyes never left Layla. His gaze softened for a second, almost as if he was pleading with her silently, as if the chaos around them didn't exist. The guard stepped back, uneasy. One finally released her arm, then the other. Layla slowly rose to her knees, confusion swirling inside her chest. She searched his face for answers. Daughter, she whispered under her breath, barely audible. The billionaire swallowed hard, but before he could respond, the booming voice of a man echoed from the balcony above. Robert. Heads turned upward. There stood Edward Masters, Robert's longtime business rival, his tuxedo immaculate, his smirk sharp as a knife. He looked down at the scene unfolding below, his voice dripping with mockery. Is this your idea of a family reunion? Parading a poor girl into your mansion, calling her your daughter? He chuckled cruelly. Or is this just your way of stirring pity for yourself? The room tense again. Robert clenched his fists, his jaw tight, but he didn't respond immediately. Layla stood shakily, her heart pounding. She didn't understand why this powerful man was defending her, why he had called her daughter. The word echoed in her mind, louder than the chatter around them. Edward's voice sliced through again. You always did have secrets, Harrington. But this is going to ruin you. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Robert finally shouted back. You don't know what you're talking about, Edward. But Edward only smiled wider, as though he had been waiting for this moment. Oh, I know more than you think. The question is, does she? He gestured toward Layla, his eyes narrowing. Layla froze. The spotlight was suddenly on her, every eye in the room staring, waiting for her reaction. Does she know why you're calling her that? Edward pressed, his voice ringing out. Or are you hiding the truth from her too? Layla's knees wobbled. She felt like the ground might give way beneath her. Robert turned sharply toward her, his lips parting as though he wanted to explain everything. But something stopped him. Fear. The girl stared at him, her voice breaking. What does he mean? Why did you call me your daughter? The silence that followed was unbearable. The crowd leaned in closer. Phones kept recording. Edward stood proudly, waiting for Robert to stumble. Robert finally whispered, Layla, Before he could finish, the The mansion doors burst open with a violent crash. A team of police officers rushed inside, their flashlights cutting to the grand chandelier's light. "Everybody stay where you are," one officer barked. "We receive reports of a theft in progress." Chaos erupted again. Guests screamed. Staff ducked out of the way, and the guards raised their hands in protest. The officers stormed forward, guns drawn, and pointed directly at Layla. "There she is," one shouted. "Hands where we can see them." Layla's heart nearly stopped. Her hands shot up instinctively, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I didn't steal anything," she cried. Robert's face twisted with rage and panic. "No, she's not a thief. Don't you dare touch her." The police advanced anyway, their steps heavy, their eyes cold. Robert rushed to shield Layla, spreading his arms wide in front of her. "She's not a thief," he roared again, his voice cracking. "She's my daughter." The officers froze mid-step, taken aback. The words echoed louder this time, bouncing off the marble walls, undeniable. Gasps filled the room once more. Some guests whispered frantically. Others stared with wide eyes, unable to look away. But the officers didn't lower their weapons. Their suspicion was written all over their faces. "Mr. Harrington," the lead officer said firmly, "step aside. If she's innocent, we'll sort this out at the station." "No," Robert snapped. "You don't understand." Layla tugged on his sleeve, trembling. "Please don't fight them. Please." Tears blurred her vision. She didn't know why this man was calling her his daughter, but she knew one thing. She didn't want him to get hurt for her. The officers closed in, their hands twitching toward their cuffs. The room held its breath. And then, without warning, the lights went out. The entire mansion was swallowed in darkness. Screams erupted. Trays clattered to the floor. The officers shouted commands, their flashlights flickering wildly across the room. Layla grabbed Robert's arm, clinging tightly. "What's happening?" she whispered in terror. From somewhere in the shadows, a voice hissed, low and threatening. "Take the girl." The mansion drowned in darkness, the grand chandelier above now nothing more than a looming shadow. Screams and shouts echoed in every direction as panic rippled through the crowd of wealthy guests. High heels clattered against marble, glasses shattered, and the sound of frantic voices blended into one terrifying roar. Layla clung to Robert Harrington's arm, her body trembling. The billionaire tightened his hold on her protectively, his voice steady but strained. "Stay close to me, Layla. Don't let go." The officers shouted in the dark, their flashlights clicking on, beams slicing through the chaos. "Everyone stay calm. Stay in place." But the order only fueled the panic. Guests darted for exits. Security guards barked into radios, and staff scrambled to find candles and emergency lights. Then, through the chaos, that chilling voice whispered again. It was closer this time. "Take the girl." Layla's stomach dropped. She spun around, searching the shadows. "Who said that?" she whispered, her voice shaky. Robert's eyes narrowed, his jaw set. "Stay behind me." But before she could move, a figure lunged from the darkness. Rough hands grabbed her arm, yanking her backward. Layla screamed. Robert reacted instantly. He swung at the figure, his fist connecting with something solid. The stranger grunted and staggered back. A beam of light caught the man's face for a split second. It wasn't a guest or a guard. He was a stranger, dressed in black, his features hardened, his intent clear. "Security," Robert bellowed. "Over here." The intruder vanished into the crowd as fast as he had appeared, disappearing into the sea of terrified guests. Layla's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Who was that?" she cried. "I don't know," Robert muttered, his voice sharp with anger. "But they were after you." The police officers rushed over, their flashlights circling. "What's going on?" Robert snapped. "There was an intruder. Someone tried to take her." The lead officer frowned, shining his light on Layla. Or maybe she was working with them. Layla's eyes widened. "No, I don't even know who that was." But suspicion clouded the officer's gaze. To him, a poor girl in a billionaire's mansion already raised too many questions. Robert stepped forward, his voice thundering. "She's not a thief, and she's not working with anyone. She's under my protection. Do you understand?" The officer hesitated, but before he could argue, the backup generators hummed to life. Dim emergency lights flickered on, casting the mansion in a faint golden glow. The room came into view again, shaken guests toppled tables, and nervous guards scrambling to secure the exits. But the intruder was gone. Layla's chest heaved, her small frame trembling. "Why do they want me?" she asked in a whisper. Robert looked down at her, his expression torn. "Because, Layla," he stopped himself, swallowing hard. "Because you're important." Her brows furrowed. "Important? I'm nobody. I live in a shelter with my grandma." His eyes softened, guilt flashing in them. "You're not nobody. Not to me." Before Layla could ask what he meant, Edward Masters' mocking laugh cut through the air from the balcony above. "Well, Robert, it seems your little daughter comes with enemies. Or maybe secrets you don't want the rest of us to know." All eyes turned upward. Edward's smug grin hadn't faltered. He leaned casually against the railing, sipping from a glass of wine as though the chaos below amused him. "Funny," Edward continued, "how a blackout just happens during your gala, and someone tries to kidnap your girl." He pointed directly at Layla. "Tell us, Robert, who is she really?" Layla froze under the weight of dozens of stares. She didn't know who she was in this story anymore. She only knew she was being hunted, and this man she'd never met before night kept calling her daughter. The whispers among the crowd grew louder. "Daughter? Did he say daughter? What's going on?" Robert's fists clenched. "That's none of your business. Edward." Edward smirked. "Oh, but it is. You see, the board members, your investors, the media, they'll all want answers. You've built an empire on secrecy, Robert. But secrets don't stay buried forever." The room tensed again, the whispers growing. Layla pressed closer to Robert, fear gnawing at her chest. She wanted to disappear, to wake up and find out this was just a nightmare. The police officers glanced at each other, uneasy. The lead officer finally said, "We need to take statements. Everyone, and the girl comes with us." "No." Robert's voice boomed across the room. "She's not going anywhere." The officer squared his shoulders. "Mr. Harrington, obstructing a police investigation isn't wise, no matter how rich you are." Layla's breath caught. Her legs shook beneath her. She wanted to shout that she hadn't done anything wrong, but the words stuck in her throat. Robert lowered his voice, but his tone was steel. "You're not laying a hand on her." The tension between him and the officers was palpable, a standoff teetering on the edge of chaos. Suddenly, a loud cry rose from the far side of the room. The vault has been opened." Every head whipped toward the double doors leading to the secured wing of the mansion. Guards rushed in that direction, their radios crackling frantically. Edward's smirk widened. Well, looks like while everyone was distracted, someone helped themselves to Harrington's fortune." The officers cursed, torn between guarding the crowd and rushing toward the vault. Robert's eyes flickered with both fury and realization. Someone had staged this. The blackout, the attempted kidnapping, the vault robbery, it was all connected. Layla tugged his sleeve, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Harrington, what's happening? Why is this happening?" His gaze dropped to her, softening just for a moment. He cupped her cheek gently, his voice low. "Because you're part of something much bigger than you know, Layla. And I swear, I'll protect you, no matter what it costs." Tears stung her eyes. She didn't understand, but she felt the sincerity in his words. Before she could reply, a deafening alarm blared through the mansion. Red emergency lights flashed, casting everything in a sinister glow. "Security breach in the vault," a guard shouted. "They've taken the diamonds." The room erupted into chaos once again. Edward's laughter rang out above it all, cruel and triumphant. "Looks like your little secret just cost you everything, Robert." Robert's eyes burned with rage, his hand still gripping Layla's. But then another gunshot cracked through the air. The sound silenced the room instantly. Guests froze mid-step, mouths hanging open. The officers ducked instinctively. The bullet had shattered a wine glass on the banquet table, the shards scattering across the marble floor. And from the shadows at the edge of the room, the same voice hissed again. "This time we don't miss." Layla's heart stopped. Robert pulled her behind him, his body shielding hers. The intruder had returned, and he wasn't alone. The shattered wine glass still glittered on the marble floor when the silence broke. Heavy boots echoed from the shadows, and then figures emerged, for masked intruders dressed in black, weapons drawn, their presence freezing the entire mansion in place. Gasps swept through the crowd. Some guests clutched their pearls, others instinctively ducked behind overturned tables, and the police officers raised their guns in response. The lead intruder's voice was the same one Layla had heard in the darkness earlier. Low, cold, commanding. "Hand over the girl," he growled, his gun aimed directly at Robert Harrington. "Now!" Layla's breath caught in her throat. She pressed herself against Robert's back, her small hands gripping his jacket. Robert's voice thundered back. "Over my dead body." The tension snapped like a taut wire. Police officers barked commands, their weapons trained on the intruders. Guests screamed and scrambled for the exits, only to be blocked by security guards trying to control the chaos. Edward Masters, still leaning casually on the balcony, didn't move an inch. He smirked as though watching a performance staged for his amusement. "Oh, Robert," he called down mockingly. "Looks like your little secret is a magnet for trouble." Robert ignored him. His focus was locked on the intruders. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. Layla's heart pounded so loudly she thought everyone could hear it. Why did they want her? She was just a girl. Nothing about this made sense. "Please," she whispered, tugging on Robert's sleeve. "Don't fight them. They'll hurt you." Robert turned his head slightly, his eyes blazing but gentle as they landed on her. "I won't let them take you, Layla. I promised I'd protect you." The intruders stepped closer, their weapons glinting under the red emergency lights. The leader tilted his head. "This isn't about you, Harrington. Step aside. She's the one we came for." The lead officer raised his voice, trying to seize control. "Drop your weapons. You're surrounded." But the intruder only chuckled darkly. "Surrounded? You think you're in control here?" He snapped his fingers. Suddenly, more figures poured into the shattered windows along the side of the mansion. Glass cascaded to the floor as at least 6 more masked intruders slid inside, their guns raised. Screams erupted again. Guests stampeded toward the far exits. The mansion that had once gleamed with wealth and luxury now pulsed with fear and danger. Layla's knees buckled. She gripped Robert tighter, tears blurring her vision. "Why me? Why do they want me?" Robert's jaw clenched. "Because you're not who you think you are." Her eyes widened. She wanted to ask what he meant, but the intruder surged forward, cutting off the moment. The lead officer shouted, "Open fire!" Gunshots cracked through the mansion. The chandelier rattled above, shards of glass rained down, and the scent of gunpowder filled the air. Guests screamed louder, diving to the ground. Robert pulled Layla behind an overturned table, shielding her with his body. Bullets splintered the wood above them. "Stay down," he commanded. Her small voice trembled. "Are we going to die?" He cupped her cheek briefly, his eyes fierce but full of something she hadn't seen before, something almost fatherly. "Not as long as I'm here." Security guards returned fire, police shouted commands, and the intruders advanced with military precision. The mansion echoed with chaos, the battle between wealth, law, and shadows raging across the marble floor. Then, in the middle of the firefight, Edward Masters raised his glass on the balcony and shouted, "Careful, gentlemen. Don't damage the merchandise." Every head turned. The intruders froze for half a second. Robert's stomach dropped. Edward's smirk widened. "Yes, Robert. Don't act so surprised. You think enemies like to show up out of nowhere? You think your precious girl isn't the center of something bigger? You've been hiding her, but others knew. And now everyone does." Layla's mouth went dry. She stared up at Edward, her body trembling. Merchandise? Was that how he saw her? Robert roared up at him. "You did this? You set this up?" Edward raised his brows innocently. "Set it up? No, no. I just made a few introductions. He sipped his wine leisurely. But watching it all unfold, that's priceless. Rage burned in Robert's chest. He wanted to tear Edward down from that balcony with his bare hands. But Layla's frightened sobs pulled him back to the moment. He had one job: protect her. The intruders seized a distraction. Two broke away from the firefight and advanced directly toward Robert's position. Layla gasped as one reached for her arm. Robert swung, punching the man square in the jaw. The intruder stumbled, his mask shifting. Layla caught a glimpse of scarred skin and piercing gray eyes before the man adjusted it quickly. The second intruder lunged, grabbing her wrist. She screamed, kicking wildly. Robert yanked her free and shoved the man back, but more intruders were closing in. The police officers fought desperately, but they were outnumbered. The guests were almost all gone now, save for the staff who had hidden behind pillars and furniture. "Robert!" One of the senior guards shouted from across the room. "We can't hold them much longer." Robert's mind raced. He needed to get Layla out of here. He leaned close to her, his voice urgent. "Layla, listen to me. There's a service tunnel under the east wing. It leads to the gardens. If I say run, you run. Do you understand?" Her tear-streaked face lifted to his. "But what about you?" His throat tightened. "I'll be right behind you. I promise." Before she could answer, a deafening explosion rocked the mansion. The eastern wall blew inward, flames licking at the ceiling. Debris scattered across the floor, knocking guests and guards off their feet. The intruders cheered. Reinforcements had arrived. Smoke filled the air, choking and thick. Layla coughed, her eyes burning. Robert pulled his jacket over her mouth and nose, shielding her as best as he could. Through the haze, she saw the leader of the intruders advancing again. His gun was aimed directly at her head. "Enough games," he snarled. "She comes with us. Now." Robert rose to his feet, placing himself fully in front of Layla, arms spread wide. His voice was steady, even in the chaos. "You'll have to kill me first." The leader smirked beneath his mask. "That can be arranged." He pulled the trigger. The sound cracked through the smoke-filled room. Layla screamed, but instead of Robert falling, the bullet pinged against a steel tray one of the caterers had thrown at the last second. The tray clattered to the floor, dented but effective. The intruder cursed. The caterer, a young man named Daniel, grabbed Layla's arm. "Run! Go now!" Robert shouted. "Take her to the tunnel!" Daniel pulled her toward the east wing as Robert covered them, shoving intruders aside with fists and fury. Layla stumbled through the smoke, her lungs burning, her tears mixing with soot. She didn't know if Robert was still behind them, if the police could win, if Edward was still laughing on the balcony. She only knew one thing. Someone wanted her, and they were willing to destroy everything to get her. Daniel pushed open a hidden panel behind the statue, revealing a narrow stone stairwell. "Go," he urged. Layla hesitated, looking back toward the chaos. Robert's figure was barely visible in the smoke, still fighting, still shouting her name. Her heart ached. She didn't understand why he was risking his life for her, why he called her his daughter, but in that moment, she wanted to believe him. "Mr. Harrington," she cried, her voice breaking. His head turned toward her, his eyes locking onto hers even through chaos. "Run, Layla, run." Tears streaming down her face, she turned and sprinted down the tunnel with Daniel, the stone walls closing in around them. The roar of the battle grew fainter, swallowed by the darkness. But just as the tunnel curved, a shadow moved ahead. Another masked intruder stepped into their path, blocking the way out. His gun rose slowly, and his voice was the same cold whisper that had haunted her all night. "End of the line, girl." The loud voices from outside the mansion echoed through the hallway as the guards argued with Mrs. Robinson. Ava could hear the shouting even from the upstairs balcony. She rushed to the edge, her small hands gripping the carved wooden railing, and looked down. Her grandmother stood firm, her wrinkled face filled with determination as she tried to reason with the towering security guards. "Please," Mrs. Robinson pleaded. "She's just a child. She didn't mean to cause any harm. She was only curious." But the guards shook their heads. One of them, a broad-shouldered man named Derek, pointed toward Ava with a stern look. "Ma'am, she crossed a boundary without permission. That's trespassing. Rules are rules." Ava's heart pounded. She felt guilty for slipping into the garden earlier, but she hadn't expected it to escalate like this. She had only wanted to see the flowers up close, flowers she had only ever admired from a distance through the iron gates. "Grandma," Ava whispered under her breath, fear tightening in her chest. At that very moment, a tall figure appeared behind the guards. It was Jonathan Sterling, the billionaire himself. His sharp blue suit caught the light, but it wasn't his clothes that demanded attention. It was the anger and urgency in his voice. "She's not a thief," Jonathan roared, stepping forward so quickly that the guard staggered back. "She's my daughter." The room went silent. Everyone froze, even Mrs. Robinson. The words hung in the air like thunder, impossible to ignore. Ava blinked in confusion. Daughter? Her? What did he mean by that? She could feel dozens of eyes on her, and her legs felt like they might give out. Mrs. Robinson's voice trembled as she looked up at Jonathan. "Mr. Sterling, what are you saying?" Jonathan didn't answer immediately. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his fists clenched at his sides as if he was fighting a war inside himself. The guards looked at each other, unsure whether to stand down or press on. Finally, Jonathan raised his hand, signaling them to back off. "I said leave her alone," he repeated, this time quieter but no less commanding. "She's not what you think." The guards hesitated, then stepped back. Derek muttered under his breath, but none of them dared argue with the man who signed their paychecks. Ava's knees wobbled as she stood frozen. Her grandmother walked forward quickly and wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "It's all right, sweetheart. I've got you," Mrs. Robinson whispered. But even she couldn't hide the shock from her face. Jonathan took a slow step closer, his eyes fixed on Ava. There was something in his expression, not just anger, but pain, longing, and perhaps even guilt. "No one touches her," he said firmly. "Do you understand?" The guards nodded reluctantly and began to disperse, but the tension in the air remained. Mrs. Robinson tightened her grip on Ava. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice low and firm, "what exactly do you mean by calling her your daughter?" "She's my granddaughter. I've raised her since she was little. You don't even know her." Jonathan's jaw clenched. His eyes darted between Mrs. Robinson and Ava. "It's complicated," he said, almost whispering. "But I won't let anyone hurt her. Not now. Not ever." Ava felt her heart race faster. She wanted to ask questions, to demand answers, but fear kept her silent. Instead, she buried her face in her grandmother's side, her mind racing with confusion. Mrs. Robinson gave Jonathan a hard stare. "If you got something to say, you'd better say it properly," she said. "Don't just throw words around like that in front of a child." But Jonathan didn't reply. He turned sharply and walked back into the mansion, his steps heavy and deliberate. The hall grew quiet again, leaving only Ava, her grandmother, and the fading footsteps of the billionaire echoing in the distance. Later that evening, Mrs. Robinson sat with Ava in their small rented apartment across town. The place was dimly lit, with peeling wallpaper and a single flickering lamp. Ava sat curled up on the couch, her wide eyes fixed on her grandmother. "Grandma," Ava whispered, "why did Mr. Sterling say I was his daughter?" Mrs. Robinson sighed deeply. She had known this day might come, but she hadn't expected it to happen like this. She smoothed Ava's hair with her wrinkled hands. "Sometimes people say things in the heat of the moment," she said carefully. "It doesn't always mean it's true." But he sounded serious. Ava insisted, like he really meant it. Mrs. Robinson's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't want to lie, but she also didn't want to reveal too much too soon. "What matters, Ava, is that you're safe. That's what's important. Don't let his words confuse you." Still, the unease in her chest grew heavier. The next morning, a knock sounded at their door. Mrs. Robinson frowned and walked cautiously to open it. Standing outside was none other than Jonathan Sterling. He wasn't in a suit this time, but dressed simply in a white shirt and dark jeans. Still, his presence filled the tiny hallway. "Good morning," he said softly, his tone a stark contrast to the anger the day before. Mrs. Robinson stiffened. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk," Jonathan replied. His eyes glanced toward Ava, who peeked from behind the couch. "It's about her." Mrs. Robinson's heart raced. She didn't want to hear what he had to say, not here, not now. But before she could respond, Ava stepped forward. "Why did you call me your daughter?" Ava asked, her small voice trembling but steady. Jonathan crouched down, so he was at eye level with her. His eyes softened, and for a brief moment, he seemed vulnerable, almost broken. Because he said slowly, "You deserve the truth, and I can't keep it from you any longer." Mrs. Robinson gasped, reaching for Ava's hand, but Jonathan continued before she could stop him. "There's more to your story than you know, Ava," he said, "and I'm the one who owes you answers." Just then, the lights in the apartment flickered, and a sudden crash sounded from outside the door. All three of them turned their heads sharply toward the noise. Heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway, and a man's voice barked orders. "Check every door." Ava clung tightly to her grandmother. Jonathan's face darkened. Whoever it was, they weren't friendly, and they were getting closer. The knock turned into pounding. The door shook under force. Mrs. Robinson's voice cracked. "Who is that?" Jonathan stood tall, his eyes sharp with determination. "People who don't want me telling the truth," he muttered. The pounding grew louder, more aggressive. Ava's small frame trembled. Mrs. Robinson pulled her close, whispering prayers under her breath. Jonathan glanced at them both, then at the fragile wooden door about to splinter under the force of the pounding. He knew they didn't have much time. "Stay behind me," he said firmly, "no matter what happens." And then, with a deafening crack, the door flew open. The wooden door crashed open with a thunderous bang, shards of splinters scattering across the floor. Ava screamed and clutched her grandmother's waist, her small fingers digging into the fabric of Mrs. Robinson's dress. Jonathan immediately stepped in front of them, his frame like a shield. Three men stormed into the apartment. They weren't in uniform, but their matching black jackets and hard expressions told everyone in the room they meant business. The tallest of them, a man with a scar running down the side of his face, stepped forward first. "Mr. Sterling," the scarred man said with a sneer, "you've been avoiding us." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "This isn't the place," he said through clenched teeth. "Not here. Not with them." The scarred man glanced over Jonathan's shoulder at Ava and Mrs. Robinson. His eyes narrowed. "So this is a girl?" Ava froze. Her heart beat so fast she thought it might burst out her chest. She didn't understand who these men were, or why they were looking at her like that. She pressed her face against her grandmother's side, wishing she could disappear. Mrs. Robinson stood tall despite her trembling hands. "Leave her out of this," she demanded, her voice shaking but steady enough to make the men pause. "She's just a child." The scarred man smirked. "Children grow up, and sometimes they grow into problems." Jonathan's fists clenched. He took a step forward, his voice low and sharp. "You lay one finger on her and you'll regret it." The men laughed coldly, but Jonathan's eyes didn't waver. There was something in his stance, something in his voice, that made even hardened men hesitate. "Look," Jonathan said finally, lowering his voice but keeping it firm. "You have no business here. This is between you and me. Leave them out of it." The scarred man tilted his head. "Maybe, but we'll be keeping an eye on the girl. If you don't do what's required, well, accident happened." Ava felt Mrs. Robinson's arms tighten protectively around her. Fear spread like ice in her veins. The men finally backed out of the apartment, but not before leaving a warning. "You have until Friday, Sterling. Don't make us come back." The door slammed shut behind them, leaving silence in their wake. Silence, so heavy it felt like the air itself was pressing down. Jonathan ran a hand down his face, his breathing rough. "I didn't want this," he muttered. "Not here, not with her around." Mrs. Robinson guided Ava to the couch and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "What was that about? Who were those men?" Jonathan shook his head. "It's complicated." "You keep saying that." Mrs. Robinson snapped. Her voice, usually calm, cracked with a weight of fear. but you brought danger right into this home, into her life. I don't care how complicated it is. You better start explaining." Jonathan's eyes flickered to Ava, who sat quietly, hugging her knees to her chest. Her eyes were wide, searching, desperate for answers. He let out a long, heavy sigh. "They're connected to my past, and to hers. They don't want the truth coming out. If it does, they lose everything." Mrs. Robinson froze. "The truth about what?" Jonathan hesitated, his lips parting, but no words came out. His throat tightened. He wanted to say it, but fear held him back. Fear not for himself, but for what the revelation might do to Ava. Ava finally broke the silence, her small voice piercing through the tension. "Grandma, is he telling the truth? Do they want to hurt me?" Mrs. Robinson squeezed her hand. "No, baby. Nobody is going to hurt you. Not while I'm here." She turned to Jonathan, her eyes like fire. "But I want you gone. Tonight. If you're bringing danger, I won't have it in this house." Jonathan's face darkened with guilt. "I can't just leave," he said quietly. "Not now. Not when they've already seen her. If I walk away, they'll come back. And next time, they won't stop at threats." The room fell into silence again. Mrs. Robinson knew he was right. She hated it, but she knew. That night, Ava lay in bed but couldn't sleep. Every creak in the walls, every car horn outside, made her flinch. Her grandmother sat in a rocking chair nearby, humming softly to soothe her, but even the gentle tune couldn't quiet the storm in Ava's mind. "Grandma," Ava whispered after a while, "what if those men come back?" Mrs. Robinson reached over and held her hand. "Then we'll be ready. You don't have to worry about that." "But why do they care about me?" Ava asked. Her voice cracked on the last word. Mrs. Robinson swallowed hard. She didn't want to say it. "Not yet. Some people are cruel, Ava. They see things they want control, even if it means hurting others. But you're stronger than you think." Ava turned her head toward the window. The moonlight poured in, casting long shadows across the floor. Her small voice carried a thought she had been holding inside all day. "He called me his daughter. Do you think he meant it?" Mrs. Robinson's heart twisted. She had no answer that could comfort Ava, so she just held her hand tighter. The next morning, Jonathan was already gone from the apartment. Mrs. Robinson wasn't sure if he had left or simply disappeared to handle whatever business he had with those men. Part of her was relieved, but another part of her worried what trouble he might be walking into. Ava, however, couldn't stop thinking about him. His words, his anger, the way it stood in front of her like a shield. It didn't feel like an act. It felt real. At school that day, she couldn't concentrate. Her friends tried to talk to her, but she barely heard them. At recess, while the other kids played tag, Ava sat alone by the fence, staring out into the distance. "Why would he call me his daughter?" she whispered to herself. "Why me?" Meanwhile, Jonathan sat in his sleek black car parked at the edge of town. He wasn't wearing his suit, just a plain hoodie and jeans. His phone buzzed, and he answered. "It's done," the voice on the other end asked. "Not yet," Jonathan said firmly, "but I won't let them near her." "You can't protect her forever," the voice replied. "They'll keep coming until you give them what they want." Jonathan's eyes hardened. "Then they'll have to go through me first." He ended the call and gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He had promised himself years ago he would never let the past touch Ava. But now the past had caught up, and the only way to save her was to face it head-on. That evening, Mrs. Robinson walked Ava home from school. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. As they reached their building, Mrs. Robinson stopped suddenly. The door was ajar. Her breath caught. She quickly pulled Ava behind her and stepped inside cautiously. The apartment was a mess. Drawers had been pulled out, paper scattered everywhere. Ava's eyes widened. "Grandma, what happened?" Mrs. Robinson's voice trembled. "Someone's been here." Suddenly, a voice came from the kitchen. "You shouldn't have come back so soon." Mrs. Robinson froze. Ava gasped. A shadow moved, and then the scarred man from the night before stepped out into the living room, holding one of Mrs. Robinson's kitchen knives. You were warned, he said with a cold smile. Mrs. Robinson pulled Ava close to her chest. Please, she whispered. She's just a little girl. Leave her out of this. The man shook his head slowly. It's not that simple. She's the reason all of this is happening. The knife glinted under the flickering light. Ava's knees buckled, and just as the man took a step closer, the front door slammed open again. Jonathan stood there, his eyes blazing. Jonathan's figure filled the doorway like a storm. His eyes locked on the scarred man, who held the knife loosely but with menace, its steel catching the dim light of the small apartment. Drop it, Jonathan growled, his voice low and controlled, but vibrating with anger. The scarred man smirked. You're too late, Sterling. This ends tonight. Ava pressed herself against Mrs. Robinson's side, her small body trembling. Her grandmother's arms wrapped tightly around her, but even Mrs. Robinson couldn't hide the terror in her eyes. Jonathan stepped further into the room, closing the door behind him with a deliberate click. No, he said firmly, every word sharp. It doesn't end tonight. Not like this. The scarred man tilted his head, amused. You think you can stop me? Jonathan's jaw tightened. His voice grew darker. I don't think. I know. For a tense moment, silence filled the air. The only sound was Ava's quick, shallow breathing. Then, suddenly, the scarred man lunged forward. Mrs. Robinson screamed. Ava buried her face into her grandmother's chest. But Jonathan was faster. In a single swift move, he grabbed the scarred man's wrist, twisting it hard. The knife clattered to the floor. Jonathan shoved him backward, slamming him into the wall, so hard the picture frames rattled and fell. The scarred man grunted, struggling against Jonathan's strength, but Jonathan didn't let go. His face was inches away, eyes burning with fury. You ever come near them again, Jonathan hissed, and I swear it'll be the last mistake you ever make. The man sneered, though his voice shook. You can't protect her forever, Sterling. She's the key. You know it, and we know it. You can't hide her from us. Jonathan's grip tightened, his knuckles white. For a moment, it looked like he might lose control completely. But then he pushed the man away, sending him stumbling toward the door. Get out, Jonathan ordered. The scarred man picked himself up, straightened his jacket, and smirked again. This isn't over. Friday's coming fast. With that, he disappeared into the night, slamming the door behind him. The apartment fell into silence. Mrs. Robinson was still shaking as she held Ava close. The little girl peeked up at Jonathan, her eyes wide with both fear and something else, confusion. Grandma, she whispered, why do they keep saying I'm the key? Mrs. Robinson didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood slowly, guiding Ava to the couch. Sit down, sweetheart, she murmured. Her eyes flicked toward Jonathan. And you'd better start explaining. No more half-truths. No more secrets. If you want to stay in our lives, you tell us the whole story. Jonathan's shoulders sagged. He looked tired, more tired than Ava had ever seen. Slowly, he lowered himself into the chair across from them, running a hand over his face. You're right, he admitted. You both deserve the truth. But I don't know if you're ready to hear it. Mrs. Robinson's voice hardened. We don't have a choice anymore. Those men aren't going to stop, and my granddaughter is living in fear because of you. So talk. Ava sat still, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been waiting for answers, and now they were finally coming. Jonathan leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. His voice dropped, heavy with weight. Years ago, I made mistakes. Mistakes that put me in business with the wrong people. The kind of people who only care about money and power. I thought I could outsmart them, that I could walk away. But no one walks away from them without paying a price. Mrs. Robinson's face tightened. And what does that have to do with Ava? Jonathan hesitated, his eyes meeting Ava's. Because she's more connected to me than you've ever told her. Mrs. Robinson's lips trembled. Jonathan. Stop. Jonathan cut her off gently. She deserves to know. She's old enough now, and if we don't tell her, those men will. Ava's hands fidgeted in her lap. Tell me what? She asked softly. Jonathan took a deep breath. Ava, I called you my daughter because you are my daughter. The words hit the room like an earthquake. Ava froze, her mind spinning. What do you mean? Mrs. Robinson closed her eyes, tears threatening to fall. She had carried the secret for years, hoping to protect Ava from the pain and danger it carried. Jonathan's voice cracked slightly, though he fought to remain steady. You were taken from me before you were old enough to remember. Your mother, she made choices to protect you, but those choices came at a cost. I've spent years searching for you, watching from a distance, making sure you were safe. But now they know who you are, and that changes everything. Ava's chest rose and fell quickly, confusion and fear colliding inside her. But Grandma said, Mrs. Robinson finally spoke, her voice breaking. I raised you as my own because I promised your mother I would. I promised her I'd keep you safe, even if it meant hiding the truth. Ava, baby, I never wanted to lie to you. I just wanted to protect you. Tears welled in Ava's eyes. She didn't know what to feel, anger, sadness, or the strange flicker of hope she had felt when Jonathan had called her his daughter for the first time. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered. Mrs. Robinson's face crumpled. Because the world isn't kind, Ava. And I wanted you to have a chance to grow up without the weight of secrets and danger. Jonathan leaned forward, his eyes locked on Ava's. But now you need to know. They're coming after you because of me, because of who you are, and I won't let them win. The room fell into heavy silence. Ava stared at the floor, her mind swirling with too many thoughts. Was Jonathan really her father? If so, why had he waited so long to say it? Why had her grandmother kept it hidden? And what did those men want from her? Finally, Ava looked up, her voice small but steady. If you're really my dad, then prove it. Jonathan blinked, surprised. How? Don't just say it, Ava said, her voice trembling. Show me. Protect me. Be here. The words cut Jonathan deep. He nodded slowly. I will. I swear to you, Ava, I'll never leave you again. Mrs. Robinson wiped her tears, but worry remained etched across her face. Swearing is easy, she muttered. Surviving is harder. If what you're saying is true, then we're in more danger than ever. Jonathan didn't argue. He knew she was right. That night, none of them slept. Jonathan stayed by the door, alert, his eyes scanning the shadows outside the window. Mrs. Robinson sat by Ava's bed again, humming quietly to calm her. But Ava's thoughts wouldn't settle. She kept replaying Jonathan's words over and over. You are my daughter. At some point, Ava drifted into a restless sleep, her dreams filled with shadows chasing her through endless hallways. She woke up before dawn, sweating, her grandmother still beside her. Jonathan hadn't moved from his spot by the door. He looked exhausted, but his eyes remained sharp. Morning, he said quietly. Ava sat up, hugging her knees. Do you really mean it? She asked. That I'm your daughter? Jonathan nodded slowly. With all my heart. For the first time, Ava didn't feel fear when she looked at him. She felt something else. Something that scared her even more. Hope. The next day brought no peace. Jonathan received a message slipped under the apartment door. No signature. Just 3 words scrawled in black ink. Time is up. Jonathan's stomach twisted. He crushed the paper in his fist, his jaw tight. He knew what it meant. The deadline had moved up. The men weren't waiting until Friday. Mrs. Robinson saw the look on his face. What is it? She demanded. Jonathan hesitated, then shook his head. Nothing you need to worry about. But Ava saw the paper in his hand. She saw the fear flicker in his eyes. And for the first time, she understood that their lives were hanging by a thread. That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Jonathan paced a small living room, his mind racing with plans. He knew they couldn't stay in the apartment. It wasn't safe anymore. But where could they go? How could he protect Ava and Mrs. Robinson when the enemy already had eyes everywhere? Jonathan, Mrs. Robinson said firmly, you need to stop hiding things. If we're going to survive this, we need to work together. Jonathan finally stopped pacing and looked at both of them. Then we leave tonight. before they find us again. Leave? Ava asked, her voice trembling. Yes, Jonathan said. It's the only way. If we stay, they'll come back, and next time they won't stop at threats. Mrs. Robinson's face hardened. She hated the thought of running, but she knew he was right. Ava swallowed hard. Where will we go? Jonathan looked out the window, his jaw tight. Somewhere they won't find us. But even as he said it, he knew the truth. Nowhere was safe forever. That night, they packed what little they had. Clothes, food, a few photographs. Jonathan kept glancing out the window, his nerves on edge. Ava clutched her backpack tightly, her heart pounding. Just as they were about to leave, headlights flashed outside. A black SUV pulled up in front of the building. Jonathan's blood ran cold. They found us, he whispered. The sound of car doors slamming shut echoed up the street. Heavy footsteps pounded toward the building. Jonathan turned to Mrs. Robinson and Ava, his voice urgent. Go out the back. Now! Mrs. Robinson grabbed Ava's hand, pulling her toward the kitchen door. But before they could reach it, the front door shook violently. Someone was trying to break in again. Ava's eyes widened in terror. Grandma! Jonathan stepped in front of them, his fists clenched, ready for whatever was about to come through that door. And then the lock snapped. The door burst open. The courtroom was silent, except for the echo of the judge's gavel striking once, sharp and commanding. Everyone jumped a little at the sound, even though they had been expecting it. The atmosphere was heavy with tension. Every pair of eyes fixed on the front where Judge Martinez sat, her face unreadable. She looked over her glasses at the people gathered. We will now hear the testimonies, she said. Her voice was calm, but it carried weight, reminding everyone that this was not just another case. This was a fight for truth, dignity, and justice. Naomi sat rigidly in her chair, her hands clenched tightly on her lap. She tried not to look at the security guards across the aisle, but her gaze kept drifting toward them. Her heart was pounding so loud, she thought everyone in the room could hear it. Beside her, Henry leaned slightly closer and whispered, Stay strong. Remember, this isn't just about you. It's about every person who's ever been looked down on because of where they came from. Naomi nodded, though her throat was dry. She wanted to believe him, but the fear gnawed at her. What if they didn't believe her? What if the judge saw her as nothing more than a poor girl who caused trouble? The prosecutor stood first, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate care. His name was Charles Whitmore, and he had the slick confidence of a man who had spent his entire life in courtrooms. He walked to the center and turned toward the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, this case is not as complicated as the defense would have you believe. On that day, the defendant, Naomi Brooks, was caught inside Mr. Blake's mansion without permission. She had no identification. She had no explanation. And when confronted, she resisted. That is trespassing, plain and simple. Murmurs rose from the audience. Naomi's stomach sank. His words cut deep, not because they were true, but because of how easily he twisted the story into something ugly. Henry stood next. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with conviction. He looked at the jury, then at Naomi, then finally at the judge. What Mr. Whitmore fails to tell you, Henry said, is the truth of who Naomi really is. A young woman who was not trespassing, but returning home. A young woman who wasn't caught in a lie, but in a nightmare. He paused, letting his words settle in the air. She is not what they call her. She is not a thief. She is family. The room stirred again. Some gasped, others frowned in confusion. Even the judge leaned slightly forward, her brow furrowing. Naomi's chest tightened. This was it. This was the moment she had dreaded and hoped for all at once. Henry turned toward her. Naomi, please step forward. Her legs trembled as she stood. Each step toward the witness stand felt like walking through water, heavy and slow. She sat, swore the oath, and gripped the edges of the chair as though it might carry her through. Henry approached gently. His voice softened. Naomi, can you tell the court in your own words what happened that day? Naomi swallowed hard. Her eyes darted around the room. The jury, the guards, the strangers watching from the benches. She wanted to disappear. But then she saw Grandma Pearl, sitting in the back, her hands clasped together in silent prayer. Naomi drew strength from her. I was walking past a mansion, she began, her voice shaky but steadying as she spoke. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I saw the garden. It reminded me of something. I walked closer, just for a minute. Then the guards grabbed me. I tried to tell them, but they wouldn't listen. They dragged me inside and she broke off, her throat tightening. Henry leaned closer. And what did they call you, Naomi? Her eyes filled with tears. A thief. The word rang in the room, bitter and cruel. Naomi wiped her eyes quickly, ashamed to cry in front of so many people. Henry turned to the jury. And yet, she took nothing. She broke nothing. All she did was step into the place that once belonged to her family. Gasps filled the air again. The prosecutor stood abruptly. Objection, Your Honor. This claim is unsubstantiated and irrelevant to the charge of trespassing. Judge Martinez tapped her gavel. Sustained. Mr. Blake, you'll provide evidence before making such claims. Henry nodded. And I will, Your Honor. He turned back to Naomi, his voice softer again. Naomi, when they dragged you inside, what happened next? Naomi hesitated, then whispered, They hurt me. The room froze. What do you mean by that? Henry asked carefully. One of them, her voice broke, and she looked down at her hands. One of them twisted my arm. I told him it hurt, but he wouldn't let go. He said people like me always lie. He pushed me to the floor. I was so scared. The silence in the room was thick, broken only by the sound of someone shifting uncomfortably on the benches. Henry's face hardened, but he kept his composure. Naomi, thank you for your courage. He turned back to the judge. Your Honor, this is not just a case of trespassing. This is about the abuse of power. This is about cruelty. And this is about a girl whose only crime was being poor. The jury exchanged glances. Some of them looked shaken. The prosecutor rose again, his voice sharper now. This is all theatrics, Your Honor. We are not here to play on emotions. We are here to uphold the law. Judge Martinez raised her hand. Enough. We will take a short recess. Court will resume in 30 minutes. The gavel struck again. Naomi exhaled shakily, finally letting go of the breath she had been holding. Henry leaned down and whispered, You did well. You were brave. But as they left the courtroom, Naomi's hands were still trembling. She knew this was far from over. The worst was still to come. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with noise. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones shoved forward. Naomi, do you think the jury believes you? Mr. Blake, why risk your reputation for this girl? Is it true she's your daughter? Henry shielded Naomi with his arm and pushed through the crowd. No comment, he said firmly, guiding her toward the exit. They stepped into cool afternoon air, but the noise still echoed in Naomi's ears. She felt dizzy, overwhelmed by it all. Grandma Pearl hurried over, her eyes wet with tears. She hugged Naomi tightly, whispering, You did good, baby. You did real good. Naomi clung to her, finding comfort in the familiar embrace. But even as she held on, her mind raced with worry. Would anyone truly believe her? Or would the system crush her like it always seemed to crush people like her? That night, Naomi couldn't sleep. She lay awake in the small guest room Henry had given her, staring at the ceiling. Every sound made her flinch. The ticking clock, the creak of the house settling. Her mind replayed the courtroom over and over. The guards' faces, the prosecutor's voice, the way the jury had looked at her, some with sympathy, others with suspicion. Finally, she sat up, wrapping her arms around her knees. She whispered to herself, I'm not a thief. I'm not. But in the silence of night, the doubt crept in anyway. The next morning, when they returned to court, the atmosphere was even heavier than before. The prosecutor stood with a smug expression. Your Honor, the defense makes wild claims about family ties and property rights. But we have evidence that disproves all of this. Evidence that shows Naomi Brooks has no connection whatsoever to the Blake estate. He held up a folder dramatically. And today, We will reveal the truth." Naomi's heart dropped. She glanced at Henry, but his face remained steady, though his jaw tightened. The judge nodded. "Proceed." The prosecutor opened the folder, pulled out a document, and handed it to the clerk. The clerk carried it to the judge, who scanned it quickly. Her eyes widened slightly before she masked a reaction. She looked up at the courtroom. "This document claims that the Blake estate has had no heirs outside of direct lineage. Mr. Whitmore, are you saying this disproves the defense's argument?" "Yes, Your Honor. This girl is no daughter. She is an intruder." The words struck like lightning. The audience gasped. Naomi's head spun, the room tilting around her. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, a voice rose from the back of the courtroom. Firm, clear, and shaking with fury. "That's a lie." Everyone turned. Naomi froze. Her heart nearly stopped. It was someone she hadn't seen in years. The courtroom froze when the voice rang out. Everyone turned their heads toward the back. A tall woman stepped forward, her presence commanding the entire room. Her dark hair, streaked with gray, was tied neatly, and her sharp eyes locked onto the prosecutor with fire. She carried a worn leather folder pressed tightly against her chest. Naomi's heart raced. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew that face. She hadn't seen it in years, but she remembered it with painful clarity. "Aunt Lorraine," she whispered. The woman's gaze softened as she looked at Naomi. "Yes, baby, it's me." The judge banged her gavel. "Order. Order in the court. Identify yourself, ma'am." Lorraine stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She stopped near the front, lifting her chin. "My name is Lorraine Brooks. I am Naomi's aunt, and I have proof that what the prosecutor is saying is false." The entire room erupted in whispers. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward eagerly. The prosecutor sneered. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. We cannot allow random people to disrupt court proceedings with unverified claims." Lorraine's voice was steady. "This is no disruption. This is the truth." She opened her folder and pulled out several papers, yellow with age but carefully preserved. "These are legal documents, birth certificates, and property records. They prove that Naomi's mother, Angela Brooks, was the rightful daughter of the Blake family, which makes Naomi Henry Blake's granddaughter." Gasps filled the room. Naomi's body went numb. She could barely process the words. The judge held out her hand. "Bring them here." Lorraine walked forward and handed the documents to the clerk, who delivered them to Judge Martinez. The judge studied them closely, her brows furrowing, her lips tightening. Then she glanced up at Henry. "Mr. Blake, were you aware of these records?" Henry stood, his voice heavy. "I suspected, but I never had the proof until now. Angela, she left before I could make it right." His eyes flickered toward Naomi, filled with both sorrow and pride. "But I always knew Naomi was mine." Naomi's chest constricted. Tears filled her eyes, blurring her vision. The prosecutor's face turned red. He scrambled to respond. "This is fabricated. Convenient timing. How do we know this isn't forged?" Judge Martinez's voice cut through like steel. "These documents will be verified, but on their face, they appear authentic. This changes everything." The room buzzed louder. Some people clapped, others whispered furiously. Naomi sat frozen, her mind spinning. She wasn't just a girl fighting for her dignity anymore. She was blood. She was family. But even in that moment of revelation, fear lingered. Would it be enough? The judge ordered another recess to examine the new evidence. Naomi, Henry, and Lorraine stepped into a private room away from reporters. Naomi stared at her aunt, her voice trembling. Why didn't you come sooner? Why now?" Lorraine's face softened with guilt. "Baby, I tried. I wrote letters. I came looking, but life scattered us. When your mama passed, I thought you were lost in the system. But when I saw your face on the news," she reached out and cupped Naomi's cheek. "I couldn't stay silent. I had to come." Naomi's throat tightened. She hugged her aunt fiercely, clinging to her as though afraid she'd vanish again. Henry stepped closer. His eyes were damp, though he tried to hide it. "Lorraine, thank you. You've saved her. You've saved us both." Lorraine looked at him sharply. Don't thank me yet. You should have been there for her from the start. Henry lowered his gaze, guilt pressing heavy on his shoulders. When court resumed, the atmosphere was electric. The judge had reviewed the documents and allowed Lorraine to testify. Lorraine recounted everything. Angela's childhood, her connection to the Blake estate, her struggles, and how she was forced away. She described how Naomi was born into hardship not because she deserved it, but because of mistakes and pride of others. Every word struck deep. The jury listened with wide eyes, leaning forward. Even the prosecutor struggled to find interruptions. Naomi sat, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. For the first time, she felt her story being told, not twisted, not mocked, but honored. When Lorraine finished, Henry rose for a final defense statement. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of silence, "you have heard the truth. This young woman was treated as a thief, as an intruder, as less than human. But she is not a thief. She is not an intruder. She is my daughter." His voice broke slightly on the word, but he pressed on. "If this court cannot see the injustice in how she was treated, then we as a people have failed. But I believe you will see it. I believe you will give Naomi what she deserves, her name, her dignity, and her place in this world." The room erupted into applause, though the judge quickly silenced it with her gavel. The jury deliberated for hours. Naomi waited, her heart pounding in her chest with every tick of the clock. Finally, they returned. The foreman stood, holding the slip of paper that would decide her fate. The judge asked, "Have you reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." Naomi's hand shook. Henry placed his hand over hers, steadying her. The foreman cleared his throat. "On the charge of trespassing, we find defendant not guilty." The room exploded. Reporters shouted. People clapped. Grandma Pearl sobbed loudly in the back, clutching her chest with joy. Lorraine hugged Naomi tightly, nearly lifting her off the ground. Naomi couldn't breathe. She was free. But more than that, she was finally seen. After the trial, the media storm was relentless. Headlines flashed everywhere. Billionaire reveals hidden daughter in courtroom twist. Naomi Brooks vindicated, not a thief, but an heir. Justice of the girl who was dragged and shamed. People debated, argued, and speculated. But through it all, Naomi walked with her head a little higher. Henry moved her into the mansion, though Naomi hesitated at first. The grand halls and endless rooms felt alien to her. But Henry reminded her, "This is your home. It always was." Slowly, Naomi began to accept it. She decorated one room with pictures of her mother, flowers Grandma Pearl loved, and art she drew herself. She made it hers, piece by piece. Lorraine stayed close, guiding her through the chaos of sudden wealth and attention. Grandma Pearl visited often, always reminding Naomi of her roots. But Naomi never forgot the lesson. She knew what it felt like to be called a thief for simply existing, and she vowed never to let anyone else feel that way if she could help it. Months later, Naomi stood at a charity event Henry had organized in her honor. The ballroom was filled with people, wealthy donors, journalists, and community leaders. Cameras flashed, but Naomi stood tall, her dress simple yet elegant. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped up to the microphone. Her voice shook at first, but then steadied. "Most of my life, people looked at me and saw nothing but what they thought I was. Poor, black, a problem, a thief. But I'm here today because the truth came out. And the truth is, none of us should be judged by where we come from or how much money we have or the color of our skin. We all deserve dignity. We all deserve kindness. And we all deserve a chance." The crowd applauded, some rising to their feet. Naomi smiled through tears. Henry watched her from the side, pride written all over his face. Lorraine and Grandma Pearl stood together, clapping, their faces glowing with love. Naomi looked out at the sea of faces, strangers and allies alike, and whispered to herself, "I'm not a thief. I'm not. I'm free." And for the first time in her life, she truly believed it. And that's how Naomi's life changed forever. From being dragged and humiliated to standing tall as a daughter who finally claimed her rightful place. Her story reminds us that no matter how the world labels you, the truth always rises. But what would you have done if you were in Naomi's shoes that day? Stand up or stay silent? Let me know your thoughts and comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next powerful story.